I'm so excited to be here doing this workshop. Let me just preface all of this by saying that it's going to be real loosey-goosey. It's going to be real DIY, figure it out. Very unstructured, but hopefully very interactive. We're hoping to explore some of your use cases. And just kind of, the point of this whole model is that it's generalizable. So yeah, it'll be pretty informal. We're all kind of winging it. So hopefully you don't mind, and hopefully it goes okay. And we all learn something at the end of the day. So yeah, my name is Jessa Westheimer. I'm the Clinical Innovation Engineer at the Menninger Clinic. It's an inpatient psychiatric hospital in Houston, Texas. Yeah, so we'll all introduce ourselves and a little bit of our background with wearables. I'm going to talk about competitive audit design. I have a background that's pretty interdisciplinary. I studied neurobiology and art in college, and I minored in media design, and now I'm an engineer. Happens. And so I really like to bring in my background in design into solving innovative problems within the healthcare space, because that's what I'm passionate about. And so something that is really critical to design thinking is something called a competitive audit, which name the game today. Basically, in design thinking, whenever people are coming up with user-centered designs, they create an audit of the disadvantages and advantages, the pros and the cons of their different competitors within a space. And so whenever we were presented with a wearables use case, we wanted to incorporate wearable technology into our research, and kind of were overwhelmed by all of the many options within the space. We kind of drew upon this idea within design thinking to incorporate a competitive audit of sorts, so that we can sort of narrow down and have more of a systematic approach to selecting wearables. So we'll get into the use case that the Menninger Clinic did a little later, but I'll hand the clicker to Justin.
I don't have slides, so I'm just going to talk for a moment, and then I'll hand it over to Roz. But so at McLean Hospital, we were interested in general finding ways to improve clinical care, and also to do research. And so it seemed like a relative no-brainer to bring wearables onto inpatient services, where clinicians are really busy all the time and they're having to juggle lots of information. And so I will say that when we first started the study, what we thought we were working on was to detect when patients were getting agitated, which, as you'll hear about in a moment, is closer to what Jessa and the Menninger team ultimately did end up developing a use case around. In our hands, and so to do that, we actually ended up using a device that does have a real-time capability. It was the Embrace 2, which Patriquin, which is a company that Picard's been involved with, allowed for detection of sweat and as well as movement. So when we first started our study, we selected the Embrace because we needed something that would allow nursing or whoever to be notified. And so in the course of doing that work, we found that the device had some properties that weren't great for an inpatient setting. We had to pair each device with a separate phone. Patients on the unit often didn't have access to their phones, and so we had to come up with sort of an elaborate scheme to have phones sitting in the nursing station. We bought a bunch of separate phones. Those phones were in the nursing station, but then depending on how far your room was from the nursing station, you got different amounts of contact. But importantly, there also was a critical issue with what we perceived to be our use case, which is that as we got more involved in this project, we realized that nursing didn't want to know when patients were getting agitated. They said, we know that just fine, actually, and we don't need a new technology to help us detect that. And so, screech of the brakes, what are we even working on here? Part of this was coming from the Institute for Technology and Psychiatry. We of course wanted to find interesting uses of wearables, but and fortunately we didn't. It wasn't that clinicians had no uses for this. They said, well, agitation per se is not something we necessarily need to know about, but there are lots of things that we would like to know about, and in particular, sleep. sleep and activity is something that is a huge issue on inpatient units in general in psychiatry. And so what they said that they would really appreciate is, they know that they're not very good at capturing when patients are actually sleeping. Moreover, as you'll hear also about in Menninger's use case, the way it works now is that you go into the patient's room every 15 minutes or so and you poke them essentially and say, are you sleeping? And if they are sleeping, you write it down on a paper and pencil, on paper basically. And then at the end of the night, someone tallies up sort of how long that patient was asleep for. And often the patient and the clinical staff disagree. The patient will say, I slept great. The staff will say, I saw him up pacing in the middle of the night, or vice versa. So we saw that as an opportunity to actually start looking for systems that would allow us to do more accurate sleep and activity assessment, where there wasn't a real-time component to it. They didn't need it to be done instantly. They just wanted it so that retrospectively we could go back to the data and regenerate reports. And so with those kinds of considerations in mind, the other issue with the Embrace was that it had only like a 1-day battery life. And so if we wanted people to wear it and not have to charge it in their rooms and so on, we needed a device that had a much longer battery life. So we ended up going with a device called the Gina Active Watch, which is not even a watch. It doesn't tell the time. It really is just a triaxial accelerometer. But the nice thing about that is it has like a month-long battery life. So we could put it on patients when they first got admitted to the hospital and then take it off at the end, or take it off at any moment, at any point during that hospitalization, and within, a short period of time generate a report of sleep and activity. So we're going to hear more from Jessa about how to formally do the competitive audit, but we wanted to sort of start with some of our use cases and like why we chose these specific devices. So for us, it was both like really understanding, which we didn't do in advance. We probably should have gone through this workshop, but we only realized some of the limitations that the Embrace initially had, but also we really did refine our use case. So obviously, as they say in design, you got to work on the right problem and then work on the problem in the right way. So that's where I wanted to stop for now.
So I'm Rosalind Picard. I am full-time at the MIT Media Lab as a professor. Full disclosure, I'm also co-founder of Empatica Affectiva, acquired by SmartEye. Empatica makes some of the devices that we're talking about here. So here are my disclosures. I also have been consulting in the last year for both Apple and Samsung and a bunch of other companies that I don't think affect this. I have just a few points I'm going to make that I think will weave with some of the other things that Jess had nicely planned that actually will fit with workshop. First, based on the last talk and some of the ethical things earlier, I wanted to mention something that surprised me in our work. I know we all want to do ethical things that are privacy preserving. How many of you think that, like, hey, just some motion information off the wrist should be privacy preserving if you don't attach any name or face or zip code or anything like that? I used to think that was true. But we have learned that whether it's your smartphone or a smartwatch, when you're holding still, when it samples your movement, which you think of as not moving, right? In fact, lack of activity is used to argue that you're asleep. While you are still, a sensitive accelerometer can pick up on signals that we can do some fancy signal processing for. And we can not only extract, your posture, we can actually extract your heartbeat and your respiration from it. So with that and the shape of that heart rate information, that pulse information, we're 94% accurate identifying people in a small group where the chance would have been 8.3%. We're also good at recognizing a lot of other things too. And we have not tried to develop this to be accurate in a much larger group because that kind of makes me nervous. I'm not sure I want that out there. So all of that activity, de-identified activity data that's out there, actually if it was sampled with a high enough frequency accelerometer, can be used to re-identify you, we think. Another thing that was mentioned in the last talk that I think is really important, and this was from the story from JP Onella that came up in his work. He was doing long-term analysis using heart rate data from a highly respected commercial smartwatch. And when he downloaded it, the interbeat intervals, to get his heart rate variability, he had one set of data. And then later he went back to download the new data and the original old data. And the old data had changed. How could the old data have changed? It should be the same. In fact, it should lie on this diagonal line with the original export and the second export of the exact same data. The same data exported twice should say on the same line, but the same data exported the second time was quite different. What had happened? Well, this company is in the business of providing heart rate, not raw data. Martin can tell us more. I don't know if y'all are still not giving the raw data. But if you don't get the raw data, this is the kind of thing that can happen. So I think that's part why the speaker before was saying how important it is to get the raw data. If you are a researcher and you're doing, especially if you're doing a long-term study, companies have pressures on them where things can change, and if they're not giving you the raw data, the algorithms can change. By the way, it can change not just because they think they're improving it, they can also unimprove it for reasons. For example, somebody's suing them for something, or they have competitive interests. So lots of reasons can happen for them to make these changes. I want to mention too, this is a different topic. I'm actually in town for an epilepsy meeting this weekend in Orlando, but one of the first smartwatches, this is the one Justin just mentioned, that has only the one-day battery life and has to be paired with each phone. This was designed, it's actually an FDA-cleared device, designed to alert for generalized tonic-clonic seizures. It also collects all the data for scientific research. If it didn't collect the data, the battery life would be much longer, but there was a decision made to collect all the data, which is helping with epilepsy research. We'll be presenting some cool stuff on that this weekend. It's now enabling things like seizure forecasting. But one of the things we learned in doing this is when something requires FDA or not. And lately, FDA is, like originally I thought it was just about, okay, if you're gonna claim you're detecting a seizure, FDA wants to see your sensitivity, your false alarm rate, you know, the data that you ran it on, making sure your machine learning separated your training data and your testing data, best machine learning practice, all that kind of stuff. But it turns out that FDA these days is asking for a lot more than that. It's not enough to meet the criteria of the top journals, have high sensitivity, have low false alarm rates. It now is like thousands of pages of studies and work you have to do to get cleared by FDA. And I've seen people in the literature say, cleared by FDA, that sounds like not as good as approved by FDA. No, it's actually like being approved by FDA with a drug. It's just that devices don't get approval. Actually, there's rare cases where they get approval. But generally speaking, all the smartwatches, biomarkers and stuff in this area, most of them are going to be described as being cleared by FDA if you submit the thousands of pages of tests and all this stuff to get, quote unquote, approved by FDA. But you're not allowed to say approved. You're supposed to say cleared. Now, another thing I learned recently in this work that surprised me is your IRB can get audited by the FDA. My academic IRB, not the company one, of course. Our company in Patriquin gets audited all the time by pharma and FDAs and EU medical and all that, those folks. I expect that in a business, but it's actually happening in academia now. And what happened is one of my students checked off that the app we were building was being used for the treatment or mitigation of a disorder or disease. I'm like, what? You're shaking your head. That's what I was doing too. I'm still learning about this. I don't have all the answers. But essentially, FDA is now starting to get very picky of the things we do in academia when we are building an app or something to intervene in this space. So on that, I just have a couple more slides of examples of what kinds of things are out there. There are things out there where the hardware and the software are FDA cleared. You know, they've gone through all this stuff to be cleared. There are devices out there where some of the software is cleared. For example, the hardware might not be cleared, but an app to do irregular rhythm notification of a heart might be cleared by FDA, right? So you can have a cleared piece of software called software as a medical device running on a non-cleared device. You can also have a cleared or non-cleared platform for handling the data in the back end. And in some cases, you have the hardware cleared, the software cleared, and the platform cleared. That's the work that our team at Empatica has been working super hard on to just clear the whole thing. But in most cases, there's various subsets that are cleared. You don't need everything cleared for all uses. There are cases where you do need some things cleared and not others. In fact, I would add to what was said earlier, for each application, you need to think about what is most important for what you want to do. And just like in optimization, anything is optimal given the right criteria. You have to really think hard about your criteria, refine those, and then figure out what is optimal for you. Finally, I just wanted to mention that FDA clearance requires a lot more than it used to. So in the beginning, it required things like, are the data that you claim you're measuring actually accurate, right? How much artifact and noise is in them? Is it matching various bench testing? Is it biocompatible? Is it causing a lot of skin sensitivity or rashes and stuff like that? If you're claiming something like seizure detection or depression detection, have you done proper clinical trials, meeting that highest publication standard? But in my experience, FDA wanted a standard higher than the top journal standard. So it's good to talk to FDA early because they're usually wanting something more than what you think is reasonable, in my experience. Of course, you agree it's reasonable. There's all kinds of electrical and magnetic testing. These days, because products have software and hardware, FDA wants to see a big plan around how you handle your software as well. And that is a lot more work. It's not just that a product should have user manuals. FDA wants to see user manuals now. They want to look at the usability. They want to look at the instructions you're giving people about cleaning devices. They want to look at risks in your strategy around updating your software and dealing with customers. They want to see not just that you have good usability, they want to see you have tested your usability with different populations that might be customers using your devices or your software or your app. And those have to be diverse groups, which is good these days, right? It's not enough to just include the local population. You really need to go beyond them. There's a lot of cybersecurity you have to take care of these days with privacy. It's gotten really important because so many attackers are out there hacking into not just hardware devices, but our academic software systems. I mentioned we want diversity, people, body types, races, gender, age, medical conditions. And then relative to all that stuff, you have to show standard operating procedures for all these things and how they interconnect, so that if you change one of them, it doesn't cause one of the other ones to break. So it's really kind of a nightmare. I hope I'm letting you know how to appreciate some of this FDA stuff. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that this is only a partial list. There are over 120 different measures I've seen that are now available from smartwatches. A very small number of them have been FDA cleared. So I don't know if you would call them biomarkers or not, depends whose definition of biomarker you use, but they're digital measures. Things like SpO2, pulse rate variability, respiration rate, sleep detection based on activity, temperature, electrodermal activities for sympathetic nervous system response. And so very few things really have met that huge list of FDA criteria. Also, I'll add ECGs and arrhythmia detection, and there's some cuffless blood pressure work that's out there right now. All right, that's all I have.
Okay, as you can see, we were originally supposed to have some other people, some of my colleagues from Menninger, but they weren't able to make it, and so she graciously just changed all of our lives, so that was awesome. Okay, so yeah, part one. So basically the way that we want to kind of organize today, it'll be informal, it'll be interactive, but initially the first part, I'm gonna just do a little brief education about the competitive audit strategy, and we're gonna use the Menninger use case to kind of go through and like show you how we went through the process step by step. In the second part, we're hoping that we can like do it kind of as a group, where we'll come up with our own use case for a wearable device, and then we'll kind of work through the competitive audit strategy to like select the ideal wearable for that use case. So it should be pretty fun, so pay attention because it's like kind of quiz later. Okay, so overall this is the competitive audit strategy. We kind of broke it up into four overarching steps. First, you want to examine the use case, which we'll talk about how a use case is formulated. Then identify the device features that you're wanting to highlight and really prioritize in the device that you ultimately select. Then you want to evaluate the wearable options. Like we've talked about, there's like a billion and more every day. And they all have their own unique offerings. So really, like she was saying, identifying the features and then matching your optimal solution to that device feature is really what's going to kind of differentiate this process. And then you're going to use all of that information that we've kind of collected along the way to kind of narrow down your options and determine the best fit. Okay, so examining the use case. At Menninger, Justin kind of went over this, or kind of hit on this, but basically, as many of you know, the national standard for inpatient risk management and suicide prevention is a regular in-person safety checks. You go in and you verify this person has not been committing self-harm or doing anything, is not at risk right now, every 15 minutes. And that occurs even throughout the night. So during an 8-hour sleep interval, some rando can be going into your room 32 times and letting in light and noise, and honestly, people with a history of trauma, that's disconcerting and really disrupts sleep. The issue with this is the disruption to sleep has been proven to also be linked with increased suicide risk. So the problem they're trying to solve, they're actually making it worse. So our use case here was an inpatient psychiatric hospital, the Menninger Clinic. We wanted to use wearable devices to remotely monitor our high-risk patients and their safety statuses throughout the night in real time. It's kind of a tall order, so we'll break it down. In examining the use case, we kind of highlighted some of these key features, like the keywords that pop out. These are the important parts of the use case. These are like the use case itself, the people that are involved, the actors. Moving on, in identifying the device features, we kind of will go through each of these keywords, and then we'll ask a question of the device and then answer what that device would need to do. It'll make sense. So, an inpatient psychiatric hospital. The device that is best suited to an inpatient psychiatric hospital would not present any safety concerns. So, in looking at that, we identify what key device features are important for the device that we need. Is that making sense? So, a device with removable parts that presents a choking hazard, safety risk, FDA clearance, we're just learning all about. Form factor and adaptability are all important considerations for this specific setting. If you were maybe doing like a research study with college students, your considerations might be different. So, and the next key is remotely monitoring. So we need to know, does this device have the ability to stream data so that we can remotely monitor the patient and their physiological signal? In order to address this, we need to have a device that has a software development kit so that we can create software tools that will connect with the device and stream in real time. And then we also need to know about the streaming ability and the range of the device. Like Justin was saying, some devices do not have a very far streaming range, and you can walk down the hall and lose signal. In a safety, high-risk environment, it's very important that you are connected at all times. In managing safety statuses, what type of data can this device capture? So the physiological signals for safety status for our group were sleep, most importantly, because if a patient is sleeping, we don't need to go into their room and mess up their sleep. We don't need to go in and wake them up. Heart rate, movement via accelerometer, oxygen, skin temperature, event marking, these were things that we were kind of highlighting as priorities. Not necessarily all of them being like must-have, but in a perfect world. But our must-haves were actigraphy for sure, accelerometer, and event marking. In real time, we need a device to be able to stream data in real time. So this means that the device that we would select has a real-time accessible API, and ideally a high sampling rate, because sampling rate's super low, then what's the point of sampling it at all if you're missing something? And then we want to be able to monitor these patients throughout the night. And so can the device stream data continuously for over 8 hours? Like we kind of mentioned, wearables, if they're sampling a lot of data and streaming it continuously, their battery life tends to suck. So yeah, battery life, but specifically while streaming data. You'll find that like a lot of the time whenever you're looking at wearable devices, they'll be like, oh, 5-day battery life, but it's just like the clock face on, so be careful. Be careful about that, I've been tricked. Okay, so that's how we kind of break down and identify device features. Now I will walk through just briefly and quickly how we evaluated the wearable devices. So initially, these were all of the devices that we were considering. We had kind of had a bad experience with the devices that we had initially chosen, and so we're like, okay, it's time to start over. We're gonna just look at everything. We're gonna create a systematized approach to use like evidence-based and what exactly we needed and what specifically we were looking for, and like ensure that the device we chose would meet those criteria. So we were looking at a lot of devices. Some of them were up here on the table. But yeah, ranging from Fitbit to Actigraph, Garmin, many, many options. And then we kind of go through this process. I don't know if this is blocking, but it's blocking me. We go through a series of filters. So initially, we consider hardware considerations. So that would be what we kind of asked initially. The form factor. For example, many of you have heard of the Oura Ring. It's super cool. Measures a lot of really cool things, but also, in terms of scalability, if you're at a hospital, one size doesn't fit all for rings, so that was a consideration that we had. We were really excited about it until we realized we'd have to buy like a bunch of different sizes. Patient safety, durability, battery life, waterproofness is also a consideration, but it's not on there. And then once you've kind of gone through hardware filters and considerations, you move into software. So this is like, if customizing the GUI is important to you, if you need to create a specific application to stream the data from your wearable, you're going to need an open source SDK that your developers can work on, and you're going to need an API, especially if you're trying to stream in real time. And then moving on to physiological filters, it's important in your use case to really identify what you're after, because a lot of the time, wearable devices can be really, 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 really good at one thing, but really, really, really nothing at the other. So for instance, Actigraph is the red one over there. It's amazing at actigraphy. It's called the Actigraph, so makes sense. But their proprietary algorithm is like industry standard. It's amazing. And looking at the data, it's very nuanced, it's awesome, but also doesn't do anything else. Straight up sleep. So if you're looking at sleep, that's great, but if you need to stream heart rate in real time, no go. And then finally, hopefully after you've gone through all of these different filters and considerations, you will have landed at one choice. Sort of at the beginning, you're going to have these binary questions. So for example, in our case, an inpatient psychiatric hospital cannot have a device that poses any kind of safety risk. So any device that has removable parts, immediately nixed. So these binary questions help kind of narrow down the field really, really early on. So does this device present any safety or logistical concerns? That gets rid of all of our ones with removable parts. And in the corner, sorry, Oura Ring, that's a logistical concern. Can this device stream data continuously and in real time? So this is looking at software development kit, API. Actually, maybe not. Got rid of those though. So, can the device capture heart rate variability, sleep, movement, and event marking? These were the specific physiological factors and data that we needed. So wearables can measure a whole giant breadth of things. 120, or was the
More than 125 markers.
more than 125 markers? That's crazy. we only needed to really have a very high fidelity wearable that captured these ones. These were our priority. If they got something else going for them, we're not gonna sneeze at that. But it needs to have these things. So in that filter, we were able to eliminate a set of these devices that didn't capture them or didn't capture them at a high enough resolution. Is there an open source SDK? I was mistaken earlier. This is where the SDK comes in. In our solution, in our ideal solution, we were trying to develop an application so that we could have the dashboard, a remote patient monitoring dashboard and alerting system at the nurse station. So they can just remotely monitor the wearable-based signal. Oh, this patient's sleeping, I don't need to go check on them. In order to build that application, we needed to ensure that the device had an open source SDK. That leaves 3. Now, we looked, this is where it kind of gets more comparative-y than binary. So seeing that and just establishing the questions that we needed to, the absolute requirements that were yes, no, does it have it, does it not, we were able to really narrow down the field of options. And ultimately we were down to these 3 options. And then we kind of were able to do a comparative ranking of these 4 features. These are kind of features where they all have an open source SDK, but how good is it? Like, how accessible is it? They all have a pretty good battery life, but who has the better one? They all have high sampling rates, but which one's the best? And they've all been used in literature, publications, but who has more? So it's kind of comparative ranking in between these final narrowed down solutions that we were looking at. And then, yeah, so we just did these ratings. So as you can see, the one on top, the Fitbit Sense came out on top. It was excellent across the categories in comparison with the Garmin. This is the Vivo Smart 4 and the Vivo Smart 5. While they were good options that met most of our criteria, they had limited publications. The open source SDK was available, but you had to pay a lot of money for it. We're kind of broke, hence why I'm the only one here. The battery life was okay, but it was not as good as the Fitbit Sense. And the sampling rate, it was, I believe, less than 25 hertz, which like kind of sucks, I'll be honest. The Fitbit Sense is over 64 hertz. I don't know. You'll get more familiar with these numbers, but like in terms of like accelerometer data, we were saying it was a high sampling rate if it was over 64 hertz. So resoundingly, we were able to determine the best fit is the Fitbit Sense. Okay. So yeah, did that kind of make sense?
That's great. That's fantastic.
Yes.
Did you get any input from patients?
No. Wait, did we? No. So this was initially a research application. We haven't done any pilot testing initially. We have used wearable devices on the units, and for the most part, it's obviously all voluntary. The straps bother some of the patients, the Velcro straps with the astrograph, but we've also used the Patriquin E4 on the units, which has more of like a rubbery one. We were not as concerned just because we've implemented studies with wearable devices, but also their participation with the study. Like even if we ultimately end up implementing the wearable-based remote patient monitoring, it's an opt-in situation. So you can use the wearable and not get your sleep screwed up, or you can get your sleep screwed up, but you don't have to wear it. So it's kind of a give or take. But most of the patients that we've spoken to qualitatively with the wearable devices that we've used in the past have not had an issue. Yes?
Do you want to take questions now or later?
I don't know, just whatever. Yeah.
I had a question about sleep. Presumably it's deducing sleep by actigraphy and something else as opposed to EEG, which is the way that we normally look at sleep in the lab. So you're not getting EEG from this, right?
It depends, but in this case, it's actigraphy, which is based on a bunch of other signals that I don't really understand.
So
I'll be honest, I'm not the expert.
I guess my question would be if a patient is lying still but not asleep, would you be able to tell the difference?
Yes,
You would.
yes. There's like a million, or not a million, literally, but like a lot of different, you're probably better equipped to answer this
I
question.
was just going to say,
I think it was on.
I can hear you.
Do you want to point out?
so I mean, it depends on the solution. I mean, when we use that gene active device that I was mentioning, it's accelerometer only. And when we developed our sleep algorithm that turns raw accelerometry into estimated periods of sleep, non-sleep, as well as non-wear, you kind of want to distinguish all three. We found that it worked very well in healthy college students. When we took it onto the inpatient unit at McLean, we found that some patients who were on heavy doses of sedatives were getting registered as not wearing the device at night because they were so immobile that the algorithm said, oh, well, they've obviously taken the device off. And if you look at the traces, you can see that it's impossible because they took the device off for 10 minutes and put it on for 10 minutes, that kind of thing. So I would say the algorithm that you use and the sensors that you have are going to affect the fidelity of that, right? So including temperature, including heart rate, things like that are going to obviously enhance the ability to detect true sleep from quiet wakefulness or non-wear. But I don't know, Roz, you have other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just add, this is where FDA comes in handy too, because FDA, actually, they keep raising their standards on this. So things that were FDA cleared older may not be as good as new ones. For example, PPG-based things, they now have stricter requirements for working accurately on darker skin, which is good. That's overdue. The old SpO2 and pulse rate devices don't have that. Those signals are useful also for sleep. Multimodal tends to give you better sleep recognition, not just using movement, but combining with other channels, although I don't know if we could say anything's perfect. We haven't seen every weird case that's out there. There's also better ways of doing on-off wrist detection than movement. So we do that. So for example, if a device is FDA cleared for sleep-wake, which a couple of the ones I showed up there were, then it's probably been through a lot more rigorous testing. Like I know we had to do testing on older people, not just young college students, and people of all different skin colors and different body types and all. Although I don't think we did people on sedatives. Don't tell the FDA. Check that condition. So there's always like something we didn't think of, right? But usually you'll see like the more groups you've tested it on, the better it's likely to be. And FDA keeps raising that bar.
They're going to add sedatives now.
Yeah, they're gonna have.
Probably got a plan in this workshop. We got a question on the internet or something. I was wondering if there was a specific age group being considered for use. For example, Oura Ring is labeled as not suitable for use under 18 according to their website. I can talk about our specific use case. Whenever you're developing the use case, we'll talk about it more. There's like sort of a formula to doing it. You can do it at the organizational level, what type of setting you're working in. For us, inpatient psychiatric facility. But then also, if your study is more nuanced than that, like a specific diagnosis or addiction, or like if you have, or adults or children, you're going to have a more nuanced use case to look at, and those considerations are obviously going to have to come into play whenever you're identifying your device criteria. I hope that answered your question, Anonymous. Yes.
Quick question. Did you consider any devices that were neither rings or watches, like adhesive patches? I know that cardiac telemetry units now use some of these wireless EKGs, but I don't know if they meet any of your other criteria.
We looked at one. I did not have it on there. I think it's the BioBeat chest sensor, I believe it's called. Those were the only two, the Oura Ring and the chest sensor, that we looked at that were of a form factor that is not a wristwatch. Primarily just because within the inpatient setting and within our use case, we were really thinking about scalability. There's different ways of wearing a lot of watches. Like the form factor isn't specific to wristwatch. You can adjust it, and there's different bands and stuff. So you might wear it around your leg or your chest. But we did look at the chest sensor, but I believe, let me check my notes. because I have an answer. It wasn't the form factor that was limiting that one in our use case. It was, please hold.
Go around the chest?
The BioBeat chest sensor, yes, it would go around the chest. This one didn't have an open source SDK, so we nixed it. Yeah, so yeah, good catch. I was testing you. I didn't even think about that.
There's also nearables, so there's devices that,
Oh, yeah.
like the Emerald device, or there's a few things that are just on the wall, and they can capture movement patterns and respiration and things like that. So like FIEEE, who's here, is using that on assisted living facilities where they didn't want to rely on people's wearing a device, also because in that use case, people pretty much stay within their room, and it's more about how they move within that room. If, for us, in our stuff, we wanted to capture people as they move about the unit and so on, so that we needed something that's attached to the body. But yeah, nearables and those kinds of devices are also getting more popular.
And by the way, I double checked on this. If you did something that like alerted the nurses to the heart rate or the SpO2 being out of some safe range, that alert would require FDA clearance. So just providing the data can be done with an FDA cleared platform, like based on what I'm learning here. But the actual doing an alert required, like if you guys built that app and claimed it alerted, that would require FDA clearance.
You learned something new. We have built that app, so this is kind of awkward. We haven't implemented it, but that makes a lot of sense. So, man, I hate the FDA. But anyways, that's
we're all
there's a lot.
glad they're there for protecting us.
Yes.
From things that we don't know about. Yeah.
Oh, I love the FDA. No, but that's a good point because I didn't think about it in terms of like extending into like the software because like you get FDA clearance for like. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. This sucks, but and it would be like because if we have the software that's external that uses the SDK provided by Fitbit and like their API.
Yeah, that's fine. But if
We
you're
have to get FDA clearance for
claiming
our software?
A medical safety alert, a medical alert that somebody, say their oxygen is now in a dangerous zone.
Yeah.
Or something with their heart is now dangerous, that determination requires FDA. And it's quite a higher bar than just delivering
Woof.
FDA quality data. Yeah.
That makes sense. Good thing we haven't implemented it yet.
Yeah, and again, it would have to be shown.
Good thing
on
we only
the
tested it on me taking a nap.
Slight clarification there, if you just provide the data stream to the medical provider and they make the clinical determination.
Yeah, it's tricky. If anybody's interested in this, you should read like what our FDA thing says for the medical platform that provides all this. It says that they can't, that it actually has to disclaim all of that stuff. FDA requires you to put all that in. I won't read you the whole thing. It's public information. You can find it.
I guess as a follow-up to that follow-up, does that mean that even if you could accurately track whether a patient's asleep or not, you can't inform the nurses? Like you couldn't actually use it in the hospital if that's not FDA cleared? Or I guess that's a little confused.
Because,
Do you
yeah,
need FDA clearance for you to use it in the hospital setting?
if the sleep-wake classifier is FDA cleared with Fitbit, then are we good?
If you're using it in accord with their indication for use, you're fine. You can read all of any product. You can go online
Yeah.
to FDA and read their indication for use of their, what it's actually, evaluated.
Yeah.
And FDA says, we have tested it and it does what it claims it's doing. That's what clearance is. It's cleared to be marketed with the language that FDA has said is okay to use about it. But they're very picky
Yeah.
about that when it comes to our safety, which is, we should all be glad they are. It's just
Yeah,
the hassle
valid.
of making these devices because it's a lot of extra work.
Yeah. Huh. Makes a lot of sense. Okay.
One answer to that question is you can use any device. The problem is if you're using any device and the lawyer somebody kills himself and you say that you've person was asleep, but the device wasn't FDA cleared, the device technically couldn't determine whether you were asleep, your company's on the,
Okay, that makes sense.
that's the long line.
So like the layer between
It's all
the
about
device
identity.
itself and the
It's layer
application or
of
whatever you
identification.
build needs to be in compliance, and if not, it needs to seek additional specific to that use case implementation.
Because this is connected to that. If you use it for research purposes, is it at least okay to like test out this implication in that setting? Okay.
Yeah.
Because you
Research
do need
consent
that.
is a totally different.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because you can put all of your risks into the consent process, and once somebody agrees to use the device under a research setting, human subjects research, then it's, FDA is not necessarily going to be involved, right?
You can get an investigative device exemption. If you're actually making claims that FDA will require if you actually go to market with the device, you need the IDE, the investigative device exemption. And now the IRBs are being audited to make sure that they're doing all of this too. So watch what boxes you check on your IRB applications.
That's good to know.
Let's go to non-FDA.
Please.
So
I don't know
I'm
any.
really interested in the event markers because that was something that I was worried in wearables, especially if you have, where you want to mark a context of, if someone's really upset because they just had a reminder of trauma, for example. Are the devices that you're seeing, is that something that's currently easily available on most devices?
So we actually have a couple of like implementations of something like that. Originally, we had used the Empatica E4 before, and when we were like initially piloting it on the units, it has one button on it, the event marking button, and I forget exactly, but when a patient was experiencing like, they were getting into it, they were meant to press the button one time, and whenever they're coming back down, twice. But honestly, who even knows? It could have been the opposite, and I imagine a lot of them definitely forgot, because when we were looking at the data, it was a mess. Because they could be agitated, and then more agitated, and then more agitated, but then they could have also just forgot their last state. And so we were asking them a lot to like keep track of their previous state and like what they are relative to that, and so it was a lot, and the data was kind of iffy with that. Our solution now, or how we've been kind of doing the workaround, the Fitbit Sense, we're able to customize the graphical user interface, the screen. And so we've been working on like different design implementations of like, if you did experience, or like you were reminded of a trauma and you felt distress, what would be the clearest way on a screen, like on the kind of small screen to indicate that and record that? So yeah, like the swiping, or like a little ranking, or like just one button, or one button that says, feeling good, and one button that says, not so good. So we're kind of working through a lot of different iterations, and we're probably going to do a lot of usability testing and like feedback from patients of like what would be the most clear to them. But there's like many of these watches that have a customizable watch face. It's very easy to create a screen where you can make that sort of decision or like event marking like an option, or you can lock the screen as such.
And some people call this like micro EMA, so it's like micro ecological assessment. So when we were starting this stuff, there were very few devices around that you could do any sort of micro EMA. You might have one button for just something that was pre-specified, but then you would have to use a smartphone app or something like that to actually label what that was supposed to be. Whereas nowadays there are a number of devices out there where you can actually ask questions right on the face of the device and have people answer the questions, or with an Apple Watch or something, do your full XY screen to be able to play with stuff.
And then we're also working on like an app that kind of like it just like runs in the background, and then it like conducts EMA on the watch. So like every 6 hours or so it'll like pop up and like, how you doing? And then you kind of answer the question, so it's like less invasive, I guess, or a lot of I don't know, I can't say patients, but people have expressed that this is a good idea, and that in terms of collecting EMA data like regularly. Sorry? Oh, this is not for those ones. They're like, and the hours would be like adjusted accordingly so that you don't disrupt sleep. We're all about not disrupting sleep. We want to preserve sleep as much as possible. Yeah.
So we have like 30 minutes. Do you
Oh.
want to go to the interactive part? Or?
I don't know.
I think we should.
Okay. Okay. You know, I'm here all day, so. My flight leaves at 9, so. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Okay, so moving on. We're going to do an interactive portion. So collectively, the goal here for this part is we're going to come up with a use case together. The warm-up was to write down some like potential wearable use cases. And so here's our formula the aforementioned formula. Oh, it's kind of messed up. And yeah, so we'll work through that in a very efficient and organized way. So basically, this is like a very simplified formula. You can add like any sort of nuance or detail to this. And the categories are like very general purposefully. So A, type of organization. And then before we also talked about like you can identify like specific patients or like specific end users you're like wanting to address and like their qualities. Wants to use wearable devices to, oh, fun thing, I used ChatGPT to write this. I just like kept doing it until it made sense. Okay, anyways, it was like general enough. To use wearable devices to achieve your purpose or goal in certain context or time frame. So like in fitting our use case that we were discussing before, the type of organization was an inpatient psychiatric hospital wants to use wearable devices to remotely monitor the purpose or goal and continuously remotely monitor something in real time throughout the night was the context and time frame, I believe. So yeah, maybe we'll take some, just, I don't know, how should we do this? Like shout it out or like raise your hand if you have a good idea?
Well, yeah, so when folks came in, we asked you to put down some use cases on those Post-its. So maybe just to start, maybe anyone who has a use case that we haven't already talked about, maybe just raise your hand and we can pick some things.
Geolocation.
Geolocation? That's a hot one. Okay. Geolocation in what setting?
Nursing home and people with dementia leaving or wandering.
That's awesome. That's a really good one. Is everyone cool with that?
And then Andrew, I mean, let's just get a few examples.
I had a fun one, which is maybe a little complicated. So, therapist wants to use wearable devices to see how in sync their own physiology is with the patient. This is Carl Marcy's idea.
Yes.
Going back a line down. So two devices, one on the therapist, one on the patient, and you're measuring physiology to see how much they correspond.
Oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting.
In real time.
Yes.
Something in like pathology prevention. So I work at a veterans clinic. We do PTSD and TBIs. And so measuring how much blast exposure someone is exposed to in combat. And then we can look at possible severity of PTSD, TBI, all that down the road.
That's really interesting. It's like the veteran population.
Or a study wanted to look at the formation of PTSD.
But even more where you put the device on during the
soldiers,
exposure.
Yeah,
This is always the
detect the blast even earlier.
right. I mean, this is what Aurora's great, but they missed that because they started
missed
later.
it.
But there are other ones where you put devices on first responders or people who are about to go, and so that's a good one.
And like levels of, what amount of force are you taking when you pull the cord on the howitzer? And then do you get PTSD, do you get TBI, do you get both?
Right.
That's so
That's-
interesting.
Sean?
It would be possible to have a wearable to be able to kind of, for socially anxious individuals, to track if they're engaging in social situations, so both being able to mark it from like voice activation to see if they're talking and someone else is talking, and whether or not their geolocation is moving closer or further away to people.
Kind of in combination with the two of you, working on a wearable-based app or whatever right now that's it captures interactions. So like wearable to wearable, like proximity, but geolocation, it's like a lot, but it's kind of those two ideas, but then in like also we're looking at like self-report data with anxiety and stuff like that and like stressful situations, but then you can also like theoretically track, oh, this person just had an interaction with another person. Oh, there was a group situation. This person's been by themselves all day and like kind of away from the milieu, different things like that. So like that's an interesting idea.
And there are, I mean, Sandy Pentland and probably other people who have done essentially this, but with badges. So you wear basically a badge here, and then everyone in the group during both group interactions and also like moving around the same space, essentially for what you're describing, to be able to optimize like social interactions.
Tansy
They-
Chowdhury
Yeah.
did that original work, yeah, for her PhD, yeah, and has done.
They-
I was in that study.
Oh, yeah.
I was actually, I'm on her data boards. It was very humbling.
The,
2010 or something. Yeah, it's.
well, that's cool. There's also a study at Rice where they were using like audio. I don't know how it works,
Yeah,
but
that's what those devices use.
like the like, yeah.
Has anyone done it in family units to see also how people are in sync with the net linkage and whether or not when it gets more, I guess it kind of feeds us
That's
on that.
interesting.
Like, you would expect if it's a more adjusted family, there'd
Yeah.
be more synchrony with the physiology during these conversations and
Yeah.
less based on couples counseling research I've heard of.
Whoa, you guys are so smart.
Any other?
Creative. Which one?
By the way, the research that this
A little bit.
girl, Marcy, did
Okay.
says that there's an optimal range. If you're too much in sync, it's
Yeah.
not good. If you're too out of sync, it's not good. You gotta be sort of optimally.
Any other ideas?
You mentioned that people weren't as interested in kind of the agitation aspect of a wearable device. But I was thinking, what about patients that are in restraints? And, usually in an inpatient unit, we as providers have to contract them for safety. And then the nurses will tell us one thing sometimes, and then when I engage with a patient, that patient may tell me a completely different story. So I feel like, okay, I can let this patient out of restraint, the nurse staff doesn't feel safe to do so. So when I just like maybe objective ways to measure if this is patient calm now, instead of making like a case by case judgment based on providers subjective.
Yeah, interesting. So sort of a way to corroborate patient subjective reports of willingness to contract for safety or being calm. All right. Were there other ideas? I see some hands.
A little one. This is probably already done, but maybe like assessing like bradykinesia or like tremor in a Parkinson patient on medication to better assess like how their medication and treatment has been going.
Sure. Great. So I think we have limited time, so I think we're going to have folks like vote, right?
Yeah, let's do it quick.
So we have. Want to take us through the?
The geolocation with elder care, like in a nursing home setting, and see like when they're trying to get out.
Let's go through all of them first. so
Oh
people
wait, I don't.
remember.
Okay.
And,
Yeah. Is this a?
So the Carl Marcy kind of two therapists, or therapist and patient being able to get in sync was the second one.
Blast.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Blast
trauma.
exposure, social engagement,
So-
Parkinson's. Forgetting other ones?
The what?
Yeah.
The agitation.
And then just, yeah.
Like measuring agitation.
So maybe we can just do show of hands. So, all right, let's go in reverse order. So contracting for safety. This is not reverse order. Geolocation for elders.
I like that one.
Maybe I should not count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's not us vote.
Okay.
We'll let Alex vote.
Therapist and patient synchrony. Yeah.
Okay.
Social enhancement. 4. Blast exposure. Oh, there's a lot of those. You can vote.
It's one less than the synchrony, or maybe tie if another hand just went up.
Well, maybe let's do those two then, because they're different, but let's,
Yeah, they're very different.
we can just kind of go through.
Okay.
Sorry, what are the two?
The synchrony, with the provider and the patient, and then the blast exposure, and then like development with PTSD, or like the onset of PTSD. Yes.
Yeah.
So many interesting ideas.
So, right, so in that case, do you want to put your slides back up, or,
I have to edit it.
oh, I see.
So like, yeah, okay, wait,
Or
maybe
we could
that's
just
not the,
put it up and then say it, I guess, but,
okay. A type of organization.
so this would be the military, I suppose, like military VA, or, what's that? Yeah, so we'll
The
start with the
blast one?
blast, yeah.
A
Yeah.
military wants to use, or military research group. A military research group wants to use wearable devices to, are we looking at what are,
Measure like force of blast exposure. So there's more force if you're firing something that's, you know, vehicle mounted or like a larger weapon versus if you're firing a pistol. But the cumulative effect is what we're trying to get at.
ultimately the cumulative effect, so like how the force,
So how much force the body is absorbing. Also,
we're not worried
just
about
from what you're
identifying
firing
what the,
to the person next to you.
Well, I guess one question is though, is this a research study to link blast exposure with future PTSD, or is this trying to design a system that in real time could keep somebody's blast exposure and then like deliver it back to a clinician?
You can do that. I mean,
Because those are
you're
pretty
only
different use
supposed to
cases.
well, if they got the
a
wearable
certain
on, we can do
weapon
both.
called Carl Gustav 6 times a day because it's so percussive that it
Right.
can just detach things inside of you.
Oh.
And so figuring out safe levels and limits and like maybe a warning system of a certain amount of blasts in a day, it tells you to step back.
So maybe we narrow down the use case a little bit to that thing.
Sure. Like maximum blast in a day.
Maximum blast in a day and, okay, so a military research group wants to use wearable devices to measure,
Measure amount
Or
of
quant-
blast exposure in a day
How
in
is
a
blast-
training scenario.
how is blast exposure measured? Like on a body?
And well, it's gonna be force, I mean, you're gonna detect, so you would need a sensor that can handle detection of blast exposure, so, sound.
Yeah,
Measure how much
noise
is
as
moving
well.
around in the brain, like the jelly.
Sound,
Sa-
Like something to look at atmosphere.
Yeah.
Instantaneous acceleration.
Right, so that's the thing is that, you know, now with the military use case, the set of potential devices you could use might be much bigger, right? Because this is not just like, can you use the Fitbit or the Patriquin, you know. You could, like that use case, you might design from scratch a device that's designed for blast exposure. Otherwise, if I'm gonna restrict myself to commercially available devices, you gotta pick a device that has a good microphone on it or something else that's gonna be able to detect sound pressure waves, right? So I know the Apple Watch has, you know, there's a number of devices that are gonna have a good microphone on it, and they could be left on continuously. Like the Fitbit, the Gene Active Watch that we use, like they don't have microphones on them at all. So there's no way to modify them to capture that kind of information. I don't think
because
like physical movement of the device in space is gonna do it, but
in,
you think it would?
in quantifying the blast, the priority device, or the priority like measurements you would want to capture would be accelerometer, noise, and light.
Yeah.
Would that be an important one,
Probably.
do we think? Okay, interesting.
So I guess if you go to the next page, I guess that's the question of
Okay.
like what are the three most critical features of the device?
For the best wearable device for that use case.
It would have to be weather resistant and be able to function in multiple terrains.
That's a good one.
Really dust and water resistant.
Like
So
durable.
you're like sweating a lot, swimming. you
Element
wanna turn
proof.
dust gets in it. So durability, yeah, for sure.
Vibration resistance.
Oh, yeah.
Measure blast.
I wonder,
Also unobtrusive, because people hate wearing it, they will wear it.
testify. Should we have
I
them?
mean, is that an issue with military use case? I mean, can't they just get mandated to wear it? And I'm serious, like, because some of these things, like, in an inpatient hospitalization, I can't mandate people to wear it, right? Whereas like,
Yeah, it's sometimes
there are
nice
some
having
use
a command
cases.
structure.
It's the
I
benefit
mean, the
of
military is actually a great use case in general for digital phenotyping because, you know, military and also professional sports, because like those people are there to undergo these situations, and so they can be mandated to have all kinds of monitoring equipment on them.
But also if you're out in the
Yeah.
field, you know, a lot of people in the military are very smart people who have a lot of technical expertise, and they can figure out how to modify things to get around the rules if they don't want to wear it. Yeah.
It would probably have to be on the core.
So like a chest sensor versus like a watch.
And it
To
might be
meet
important to
the
have a
unobtrusive-
geolocation sensor on the device in that case, right? So if you want to know where,
On, off.
where they were when it was blasted, you know, if you want to confirm that they were on the actual service, then
A body presence sensor.
The animal rights people will hate me for saying this, but there are ways to do this without a person in the loop, and measure impact on the brain and so forth.
The brain jiggle.
well, that's to do the research, but I think the use case that she's describing is like an actual
Cumulative.
system that would tell you,
Right.
like, you've had enough blast for the day,
Right,
you
but
need to go
probably
back.
what you wanna do is a study that,
Yeah.
connects it to the brain shaking
Sure.
first. And then you look at a concomitant
Yeah.
signature of that, like the sound, because blasts nearby can do it too, right? But there's a lot more complexity than that.
There's a device called a blast gauge they have. I don't know if anyone knows about it. I'm trying to figure out what it's got right
Is it
now.
on the helmet?
It goes in the back of the helmet that you wear.
Blast.
Place to put it for the brain, right? Yeah, so one of my department works with it, and I'm trying to find this actual sensor, but.
There is a current study going on right now that's measuring it cumulatively, but I don't know if there's anything that can tell you like within a day. I think that it records the results, but it doesn't stream them out.
Oh.
And so there's like a current study going on.
We can,
There's
you can't look at the time.
Been going on for a while. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how much I'm supposed to.
They're like, just on a recent New York Times article about this, yeah.
They've been doing this for, I know somebody's been doing this for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's also been going on in sports for head
Yeah.
injuries
Exactly,
with
yeah.
MMA fighting,
helmets.
football, all of that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
With impact, you know, and looking at how much it shakes the jelly in your head.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an interesting use case, right, of being able to, at this moment, say, you've had enough, you need to come home now, as opposed to like,
Like real time cutting off your training so that you figure out how to do something new, but you don't damage
Yeah.
yourself in a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Just the real time, that's the tracking aspect.
There are people who want a box, even though they know what it's doing to their head, and they probably volunteer.
All right, well, so we should transition to the other use case, but can you go through the last couple of parts?
Yeah.
We're not gonna find the best device.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
let's do the synchrony one.
Synchrony one. The next slide? Well,
Yeah, so I don't think, like,
I
for
don't
this
think-
one, I don't think we can really do it,
Just
but
go
let's go
back.
back to the beginning. So, for Andrew's use case.
a new use case.
This is a psychotherapy practice or organization wanting to use wearable devices to estimate therapeutic alliance or just to, or just to measure literally like the synchrony of autonomic signals from two people
I
interacting.
think the theory is that if you're in this optimal range, it's more
Yeah.
likely that the therapy will be successful.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
the-
so like correlated with patient outcomes?
Right.
So like measure like,
Physiology?
Right, so I think Carl used electrodermal.
Yeah.
He used kind of like a skin response.
Yeah.
But you could theoretically do it with other measures as well.
Do it
He tried some others too. Yeah. And we've done them in autism situations too.
Jeff Thorne at Pittsburgh has done that a lot.
Yeah, but.
Automatic processing of facial expressions.
So yeah, so let's stick to wearables. So you know, you can do this with language, you can do it with faces, but I guess here the idea is if you just take Karl Marcy's work and try to pull it into the wearable, what would be the features? So if you want to go to the next page. So I guess what would be the three features that would be most critical to that use case?
Like good governing skin response sensor, reliable with raw data, I would say.
But the way to either start it at the same time or mark that you're starting, because they have to be timed.
That's good.
is it real time, or is this something that after the session, I mean, because
Does it need to be streamed, or do we just need to?
I think streaming would be better, but even if it's not in real time, you still, after the fact, have to have them time locked.
Yeah.
So you know that if you're seeing changes, they're happening concurrent.
You could like.
There are ways
sub-
to handle that,
like,
you can smack hands together and you're gonna get a nice.
If you got an audio.
But I do think it's
Oh.
important to keep in mind real time versus not, because I mean, real time, if you need real time, that rapidly limits what you can use. Whereas if it's okay to do it even like an hour after the fact or whatever, there are way more options. So it doesn't sound like this use case requires real time.
You just need to be able to synchronize the onset
Yeah.
after with the raw data.
I don't know
Well,
if
like
there's
any-
wearables out there that are designed to capture, like if you attach two Apple Watches to the same phone, can you get them to, like I don't know that that's a thing, but yeah.
Depends on the temporal resolution you're looking for. 'Cause
Right.
if it's within a few seconds.
Yeah, you're
I think
probably
this probably is.
okay, especially for ED, like electrodermal activity, because it's
Right.
relatively
Exactly.
slow
You just look at the
viewing.
clock, you'll be okay.
Yeah,
You do want to look at
yeah. The equivalent of flipping on and off the lights.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could, I think the easiest way to synchronize in that case is, assuming these devices are gonna have some kind of accelerometer on them, you just do something at the same time, and it's gonna sync them.
I
So-
saw a device, like a wearable, that could synchronize with video. I don't know how it worked, but the video recording device was synchronized with the device. So you could like start, it was like for a research thing and like quantifying, like it was, the process was to capture like different actions and like what the accelerometer data looked like. But in starting it, the video recorder or whatever would start at the same time, and then you can like link them up. There's a software, ELAN or something, I don't know, where you can do that.
I think you can get around the synchrony issue. I mean, are there any other, so good EDA, good,
Comfort, right? If you're expecting people to be in therapy, you want them to feel somewhat comfortable. I don't know if that's how much of a-
now what about, I mean, because I know in Carl's work, what they were looking at was not just the responses, but what that corresponded to in the therapy session. So is the idea here that you would be recording then, like, the audio of that session? In which case, then you do start to have to keep in mind, like, well, who's speaking and how do you instrument the room with other sensors? So that's just something to keep in mind. Like, if you would need some way to link, the signal you're getting off the device with the content, unless all you were looking for is over the entire course of the session, how synchronized were they, which
Yeah, if it's
I
not,
think is maybe less information, but
I think he audio tape sessions, but you can certainly videotape them.
yeah.
I would be curious to see how like the synchrony of the physiology within settings across treatment, and like maybe like treatment outcomes, but also like maybe like the YSR or something like that, like Treatment Alliance, and see like how that changes over time in accordance with the physiology. But like we had, what was it? It was GSR and like EDA. What, like, would there be other physiological measures of interest, or is this kind of like just like we'll take what we can get?
But I'm always interested in heart rate variability.
Yeah.
How well you can do HRV with, I think it was in one of your slides, pulse-based, or do you need the actual EKG, which is of course harder to get.
You can do it with pulse when
It's
you have
good
a
enough.
high-quality device with good stillness, lack of bad motion artifacts.
I mean, I would say in today's world, video is probably your best bet for this kind of study, just because, unlike in Carl's day, it wasn't trivial, to do recordings of both people and get all the information. Now you can easily get both people. You can pull out pulse and respiratory events from the video itself, so from color of the skin. So like, and obviously there you can also get language and things. So I mean, I definitely have thought along the same lines, like let's do something along what Carl and Helen did back in the day. But this might actually end up being a case where wearables might not be the best choice, right? So I think it's a great thought exercise, and like I'm sure there are ways to implement it.
You could also look at eye contact and direction of gaze.
Yeah.
Like The glasses
reading by the
wearables.
face right now of the heart rate and respiration is often messed up with specularities, movement, and talking still. So if you want to get, and you can't get good EDA from that yet under a natural conversation. Yeah.
The theory seems underspecified as to what exact measure we should expect to synchronize, so I would probably want as many measures as possible. just to
Yeah, I mean,
see
there's
if
a
we
lot
can
of studies of synchrony of like word choices and like things like that that have linked to
Gestures.
therapeutic
Also
alliance.
The
Fine eye.
biophysical
Yeah.
mechanisms that would signal
Yeah.
that as well.
I wasn't even thinking about accelerometer with that.
Previous studies at USC where they looked at synchrony of when people watch movies together, because there's a tendency for that. You're not able to see that with PPI, like you won't get the level of resolution you'll need. Like you're kind of forced into have a chest strap to be able to get it in the highest fidelity. But I
You're
don't.
talking about PEG.
Yeah, PEG is like.
The newer device, like this one's now FDA cleared.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
good enough for it now, yeah.
That's
The
right.
previous
They're
ones,
up next.
What is this one?
This is replaced.
Oh,
This
yeah.
replaces before. Okay.
Seriously, in
She's
diets,
done for that.
in diets, yeah. You can do hyperscanning,
Infrared.
yeah, infrared, MRI, where people don't have to go in the scanner, they wear a device. You can also do hyperscanning with EEG to look at, synchrony.
All right, great discussion. So I think we only have about 3 minutes left, so Jessa's now going to.
Don't look at the screen. It's too fast. Oh, okay. So yeah, this is like you can scan the QR code and it's like a digital grab bag
So, yeah, so
for
this is-
there's like templates and like resources and
Yeah,
stuff
so
from
take a
what we
picture
talked
of
about
this while
today.
it's up, because it's we don't have physical copies of this, but Jessa put together a really nice set of digital resources that has like for any kind of device, like how you would do the use case definition and how you kind of match the available devices.
And these slides are on there, which I realize doesn't help if you don't get the QR code now, because then you won't be able to access it. So get the QR code now. But yeah, this is just like I think it's Google Drive, and you should all be able to access it, hopefully. Let me know if there's okay, cool. But yeah, there's like templates and stuff to the things we talked about with like the use case formula and like the competitive, or what is it, comparison matrix for doing the device criteria with the like circles and stuff. So yeah, and there's also, we didn't talk about it today, but like device profile info sheet. So it just has like a bunch of different criteria, and you can just like fill it out, like a little profile, and then just like lists of other features. But apparently there's like 1 million I have to add. So yeah,
And
hopefully
if you'd
that's
like to check
helpful.
out a few of them before you leave, we have some examples of the devices that
Oh,
Jessa
yeah.
brought. But thanks for everybody's attention. And big
Thank
thanks to Jessa.